Dear God, I want to write a novel. A good novel.
Welcome to the Catholic Film Club. My name is Michael Coy. I'm joined by Patrick Bautista and Eric Groth, the executive producer of WILDCAT, the biography about Flannery O'Connor, the famous, revered Catholic writer. And this podcast is all about craft and conscience, and that is really at the center of this movie. So, Eric, I wondered, thanks for joining the show, first of all, but could you tell us about what drew you to this story and what it was like shepherding this movie into existence?
Wow, yeah. Well, there was, I'd like to say that the main reason I wanted to do the film was because I was so well read. That Flannery, and
this is your comment.
It's not. Well, what did she write? Good man is hard.
Good man is hard to find. Another classic.
I would say there were three reasons. So, as an executive producer, as a producer, I'm creative, but I'm not the creative. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. But I love championing the right stories and building the right team to make those stories, to tell those stories in the right way, you know? So this film in particular, there were really kind of three things that attracted me to it. When it came to us, the first time it came around to us, the producer who was the owner of the rights, so a guy named Joe Goodman, one of our producers, had the relationship with the Flannery O'Connor estate. And so he owned the rights to her prayer journal and to one of her novels, The Violet Buried Away. So he was kind of the custodian of this. And he came to us like a year before we decided to do it. And it was kind of in a slate of development ideas. And it was interesting, but we didn't like everything in the slate. I was fascinated because Ethan Hawke did sign a letter of intent to write and be part of it, you know, and so, but when it came around the first time, we weren't ready, kind of passed on it. Then a year later, the script was written, and now they were looking for production partnership, looking for financing, and so we read the script and really loved the script, but there were, like, as I said, there were three things that really drew me to this. And the first one was not necessarily that it was Flannery. And, you know, my background in filmmaking is really ministry focus. So we create and we use the films as a way of speaking into the gospel and teaching gospel and especially expressing the beautiful, the good, and the true in that art form. The first thing that drew me to it was that Ethan Hawke was writing and directing it. And I had been a fan of Ethan's work, you know. He and I are very similar in age, and I was a 20-year-old junior in college when I saw Dead Poets Society.
Mm-hmm. Oh, perfect.
Mm-hmm. And that's the first place I saw, and I remember thinking, wow, this dude's really talented. And of course he was with Robin Williams, and it was a Peter Weir film, and all those things that are pretty amazing. But I really liked Ethan's work. Things he did after that, Reality Bites, you know, Training Day with Denzel. So of course, I appreciated the canon of his work. So it was cool to have an opportunity, and I always heard really great things about him too, you know, as a person. And then I'll say alongside of that was that it was Flannery O'Connor. All right, Catholic. Didn't read a lot of her work. Read A Good Man Is Hard to Find. But I was intrigued by her. I was intrigued by the divisiveness. Not divisiveness, it's not the right word. There was like this divide, right? People either really liked her or they didn't like her. I knew that. But I often wondered why that was the case, because I never really dove in deep. I read A Good Man Is Hard to Find. I could see, well, these are hard things to read. Which we can dive into the why of that later. But so there was like the Ethan factor, and there was the desire to explore a really, who I knew was a very important person in history, especially in the 20th century, in the 1950s and 60s in the Gothics, Jim Crow South, you know, and how she addressed those things and how she was writing. But as a producer who has a real missional heart, the thing that drew me to do it most was that it was a dad and a daughter, Ethan and his daughter Maya, the great Flannery, wanting to do this film together, and that really swelled my heart. And so, you know, it was those three factors that drew our team, and drew me into like considering and then really championing it to our chairman, and just saying, hey, I think this is a really good partnership, and this is a film we should go after. But, you know, going back to Flannery, it's also our heart to tell really great stories and to do it in very artful ways. Like we're hungry to do things that are artfully made and spiritually rich, because they actually can go together. But I think a lot of times we're like, let's be really artful and the content's not quite there, or let's be real spiritual and it's just not well produced, or, you know, or the stories aren't good, you know. And so I think it afforded us an opportunity to be able to take a very important person with a really great team around us, and a really great director, and an up-and-coming acting daughter, and the core of actors he put around her, and to tell a really good story, and then for me to be able to watch and see how this unfolds in the life of this father and daughter, which was awesome.
Yeah, one of the things that I really love about the movie is how it explores the relationship between parents and children, and Flannery's relationship with her mother is central to the story. And it's funny that it's even explored. The movie does a really interesting thing where it depicts stories from Flannery O'Connor's work, but in the main roles, it casts Maya Hawke and Laura Linney, who are playing mother and daughter in real life. Well, they're playing Flannery O'Connor and Regina O'Connor. But then those same actors are put into certain roles within these recreations of stories.
Right.
And what I found there was that it was kind of one of those things that I was able to do was show you the difference between the relationships in those stories and the relationships between Flannery and Regina.
Right. Flannery had really two relationships in her life. So for those of people who don't really know, like, Flannery was very young. Her father was diagnosed and died from lupus. Flannery was diagnosed, which is where we hit on the front end of the film, with lupus as a 25-year-old. She died when she was 39. So she lived in her home, deteriorating over time, very rapidly, actually, when you think about 14 years. And in that 14-year span, she wrote all her 2 novels and her 30-plus short stories and countless letters to friends and family and others. And the 2 relationships that were seminal to her was her relationship with the Lord and her relationship with her mother.
Yeah.
And, you know, you imagine, like, there's also, you have just contentious moments too, you know. There's always the love-hate experience, you know. I mean, I suppose we have the contentious moments with our Lord as well as our living families, you know. But it you know, that was very that was her life. And I thought, like, Ethan and co-writer Shelby Gaines, who also, he and his brother Latham do the score of the film.
Yeah, they're
and that's you asked me about that one. I can tell you about how they composed it too, which is really brilliant. But I thought it was so brilliant, the device that they used to tell her story, in Regina and Flannery, Laura and Maya, playing all these different characters. And you'll notice that Laura, Regina, always played all the moms. And Flannery played these, just the different unique characters, and that we brought in 7 of her short stories. And the reason why we used that device, and I thought it was brilliant, was because if you think about Flannery O'Connor, you know, 25 years old, diagnosed with lupus, death sentence. It's just a matter of time. And if you take away her writing from her life, there's nothing, and I don't mean this as a negative toward the human person, you know, but her life's not interesting. She was diagnosed with a disease and she died 14 years later.
Yeah.
But her writing is so provocative and profound, and her writing is the essence of how she thinks and articulates in that span, and what's coming out of her existence, that it made the most sense to be able to take a swath of her short stories for the viewer to learn about who she was through that lens.
Yeah.
So why did we put Laura as all the moms? Because Flannery in her writing was often putting her mom in her stories in various capacities, or various characterizations. Flannery was also always putting some aspect of herself in her story.
Yes.
So in a lot of ways, she's like, the characters in the stories are personifying a characteristic of who she really was into this new character. Which I thought was a really brilliant way for the writers to come up with that device to be able to say to the viewer, we can't give you everything, but we can give you a sample enough to understand the things that Flannery was wrestling with, judging human beings, judging others, just her own personal racism and struggles in that scene. That those things that she didn't run from, and there's always criticism of her, and even in our film of the use of the N-word.
Yep.
And yet, she's just honest. She's very honest. Like, well, the people I'm writing about wouldn't think to use anything differently, and so to be able to use that device I think it just helped us tell a better story. Also helped us to stay in that kind of art house space.
Sure.
And to do something very interesting that would allow for the beautiful relationship between Ethan and Steve Cousins, who was our cinematographer, to dream up what's going into every shot. I mean, you guys have been involved in production for a while, and that's a synergy that has to happen. The camera is just a technical device if you don't know how to use it to tell story. It's really cool looking. Lenses are neat, but it's meant to be able to foster storytelling. And so when the two of them got together and then started envisioning, every frame matters. Every shot matters. Every scene matters. And that's one of the things I'm really proud of with WILDCAT is, like, I don't think there's a wasted cut or a wasted shot. And they all are very intentional to the angle, to the look, to the scenes that are in her stories are a little, the color palettes look different, like you got to stare at, like those things all matter, right?
Yeah. So I was blown away by every single frame and all the little story vignettes that were composed, and how how you guys really created a unique color palette for Flannery's storyline, as well as all the individual stories really conveyed the mood and just like the similarities, but also the nuanced differences with each one. Right. The thing that stuck out to me, one of the forefront ones, was the relation with a young artist and her art, and the struggle and like the personal, personal issues she might have had with self-doubt. But for aspiring artists or potentially filmmakers, writers out there, what do you think WILDCAT or Flannery O'Connor has to teach?
Yeah. I love we wanted to communicate the honest struggle she went through. She wanted to be a writer, desperately wanted to be a writer. I mean, we opened the story with her coming into the church, into New York, because she's got this relationship with the publisher for Wise Blood. And she, we opened the scene with her walking down and putting her suitcase down, and Lord, help me be a good writer. And a lot of people don't know that before she dove into actually pursuing that, she wanted to be a cartoonist. So it's really interesting. Wow. Like, you can see some of her cartoons that were used in publications and periodicals and journals and things. That was where she first started down.
Yeah, it's like she did it in college. It was like she would cut them out of potatoes, paint the potatoes black, and then press it onto a piece of paper, and that's her cartoon. And they're very jagged characters, a lot like her stories, actually. Right,
a lot of like the characterization you see in like the New Yorker.
Yes, I think very much.
But no, but then went the path of actually wanting to be a writer, and really struggled. I mean, profoundly talented, but struggled, which is why I think that the scene with Father, the priest in the film, and And she knows she's got these moments with lupus where she just has really tough days. And what can I do? I want to be, not only do I want to be a good writer, but I want to be a good Catholic. You know, and there she is in the Southern Gothic. She's this odd person. Her and her mom in the South, you know, where there's 3% Catholic, but she wants what she does to be something that is beautiful for God, that actually serves the Creator, but struggles with it because she's got this really interesting mind. She thinks about things differently. She looks at the world differently. She's often drawn to the macabre, you know, and things that are much more edgy. Her stories are not happy, you know. The endings are not happy, but but just like C.S. Lewis or Tolkien, she's speaking metaphorically some substantial, significant truths that people need to hear, you know. So, you know, your question, Pat, like what's the message to young aspiring artists? Is you know, be true to who you are, right? And listen to the movement of God in your life. And there's, you know, is there anything greater that the world presents as an image of the Creator than the creation? Than what Dostoevsky said, it's beauty that will save the world. You know, and I not to bias or downplay any other profession, but I think there's a real special calling in the heart of an artist, because God is the ultimate artist, and the Creator privileged us by giving us an opportunity to co-create and to also just to continue to be the conduit of beauty in the world. So I'm a big, I love to champion artists. I know it's a hard world. It's a hard world to figure out how can I raise a family? How can I make money in my craft? But I think if you have that gift and that ability, don't ever turn your back on it, you know, keep going for it. Whatever that means, explore it. Maybe it's not what you end up getting paid to do, you know, but maybe I've got a really good friend who's a career and guidance counselor at a university in Louisiana, and he's always working with students to, what are the two things that you really enjoy doing? And one of them pragmatically might be the one that you make money. The other one might be the passion that just inspires your life. It makes you happy. You know, and so I think there's a lot of wrestling that goes on internally for us, you know.
Yeah, I think a lot of the things that you're saying are at the heart of JP2's Letter to Artists, and which is a sort of a foundational text for our group at the Center for Catholic Media. And you're talking also about Flannery's struggles. You opened by talking about it's the struggle between her mother and with the Lord. And yeah, that's really at the heart of the movie, and it comes out in that scene with Liam Neeson as the priest, where you see that she is struggling with not just the lupus represents an alternate path that God might have for her, where she has this ambition to be an artist, and it turns out, is she an artist, or is she someone who's just supposed to suffer and die?
How do you integrate that?
Absolutely. So when you're talking about, if you just made a movie about someone who got lupus and there's no story there, I think what you're highlighting is that the conflict, that's not where the conflict lies. The conflict is where I have this person that I want to be, but who does God want me to be?
That's right.
And I think it bore out that God also, of whatever else God wanted out of Flannery O'Connor's life, he wanted her to be an artist. And
that's right. And we I think, if we're honest, like, we all have some cross we bear, right? Something we struggle with, some things, or a difficulty. Like, life is difficult. It's not easy. So when you've got pursuit of relationship with God, pursuit of my craft and ability, and then you mix in the fact that I have this cross to bear, you know, for her, like lupus. And it wasn't the end of the story. It wasn't like I'm done. I'm just gonna roll over and die. It was like, I'm gonna keep pressing out because God has called me to this craft. God is there with me. God, I'm gonna suffer it. and that God can actually use my life and my suffering through my interest in my work and my art to be a conduit for His grace. And grace comes in all different fashions, and Flannery communicated the reality of God's grace in a very different measure, that the very happy, comfortable grace that we really want to experience all the time.
Yeah. And the grace that idea of like, let's find a happy, comfortable grace comes out of criticisms that Flannery's mother and her aunt, I believe, Duchess, which is you got to tell me about that actress at some point. She is amazing, alongside Laura Linney. But they're saying, why wouldn't you want to write something that people would want to read? I love that. It's really nice.
Yeah, that one struck close to home.
Then she's like, well, it left a bad taste in my mouth, and of course Flannery's like, well, you weren't supposed to eat it.
Yeah. And I think it's one thing I appreciate about the movie is that Regina is not a cartoon character. She's not and you've actually put her in contrast with the more over the top. I don't know how to say over the top, but the more closed-minded characters that Flannery is writing. Yeah,
like in the Revelations, the doctor's office.
That scene, and so. It comes from an honest place. Like, why not just make things that are only nice? And why wrestle with the things that why depict those offerings of grace that are pushed away?
Right?
Why depict that? But that was the main subject of what.
Right on. She said, and again, that's how she looked at the world, right? And she looked at the world around her, and she had a real criticism of evangelicalism because she saw like the pastors and just, you got the pastors who are pastoring at churches and then they're leading KKK rallies and these things that just collided, that she was very critical of, and she certainly also pointed a finger at our own church too. But I think at one point she say, for the hard of hearing, you shout. For those who are blind, you draw large and startling characters. And so she's addressing, like in her writing, a spiritual blindness that she saw in her culture. And for her to do that, you had to draw, define, create these horrific characters. There's also like the double message in there, right? Like, I think in every one of her stories, you always start out thinking the protagonist is all right, and then there you've got the antagonist, and then somewhere along the way, you start disliking the protagonist, and darn it if she isn't speaking truth through the antagonist. And if she's flipping grace on its head, or the delivery of how grace, which is just so perfectly Flannery and beautiful. That she's trying to communicate, because as she looks at this world, she's like, well, I could speak niceties, but this is how I want to communicate, and this is what I think it takes. That I'm going to create something that's going to jolt you and make you very uncomfortable and make you look at it differently.
Well, the other thing is, in some ways, you can't control how you see the world to some extent. If you're someone else might have tried to write the same stories as Flannery and they wouldn't have succeeded. A lot of people do try to be Flannery O'Connor these days. They really try, and you see them putting something on. It seems like really just came out of.
It was an anointing of God in her life to do. I mean, like we all have a part to. What do you do best? Like all the times I try to do what others do well and not what I know I'm called to do well, I'm going to fail.
Yeah,
I'm going to struggle. It's not going to feel right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it takes the film portrays so well her boldness in writing and her sense of just raw authenticity. She was just gave so much of herself to the stories and was very honest and very opinionated as the film portrays, but also honest and open with her writings and with the dialogues and discussions that she brings about with her stories.
Right. That's such a beautiful part of it, like to have honest storytelling. And have a once in a lifetime author come along and to write in the right, but without offending, but offending with truth as the basis, you know, not just to scandalize, just to shock, because, you know, that's really indulgent. There was nothing self-indulgent about Flannery O'Connor.
No,
It's very much like, speak the truth as I know how to speak it, and it's not going to be comfortable, but it's not about me. It's, you know.
yeah, all of her stories I always felt like seemed very objective to me, which was why it was so. I was almost dreading watching a movie about her because I almost thought maybe I don't want to know her and her life. I mean, although I don't know why I said that. I read her book of letters to being too. So
The best thing you could ever read from Flannery O'Connor.
I agree because that takes you a total recommendation for anyone who wants to read this series of letters. But I finished it.
Inner life.
It's her inner life right up until the day she died. And when I finished it, I really felt like I'd lost a friend, you know, because I really felt that way.
It's so spot on.
It seems like Maya felt that way about her prayer journal. Which I haven't read. I didn't even know you could buy Flannery O'Connor's prayer journal.
So the prayer journal is gorgeous. We gave a copy of her. Our gift to the cast and crew, we had about 120, is we gave every member a copy of her prayer journal.
Okay, perfect.
That is how Maya fell in love with Flannery O'Connor. Is the first thing she read was, as I believe Maya. I mean, she was in private school. I don't know if it was a Catholic school or not, but in New York, and when she was a sophomore in high school, started reading Flannery, and it was the prayer journal. And she loved her words so much. I think what she connected with this struggling, suffering woman, you know, as Maya, being a young woman, who would speak so honestly in her prayer, just speak so honestly about who she was, what she struggles, what she thinks about. And Maya actually auditioned at Juilliard. And instead of, and this was part of the journey with she and her dad, Ethan was like, hey, everybody auditions with a monologue from Shakespeare. You should do something different.
Yeah.
And Maya she basically crafted from Flannery's prayer journal the monologue that she used to audition at Juilliard, got accepted.
Wow.
So that's
amazing.
The inner life. But the habit of being, I always recommend, because Flannery is hard to read, my recommendation is that people read that first, because you'll get an understanding of how this woman feels and thinks, and then you can bring that into a deeper understanding as you start reading her shorts and her novels. No.
Yeah, I agree. But you know what? I really think that this movie can do the same thing, and I've seen a lot of biopics that, especially of like great writers or people that we revere, that I just think completely missed the point of everything that this person was about. And I think that this, for me, it gave me an insight into Flannery's work and what she was going through at the time. And it was, I felt that it was an incredibly insightful, it was a very meditative movie too.
Awesome.
It's not going for, it's not trying to manufacture moments where there aren't any. It's really...
Right. I mean, one of my issues with a lot of biopics is it feels like they always say this is a true story, or this is a true story about this particular person's life. But you watch the movie and you kind of get the sense that maybe this is a little manufactured or over-exaggerated. But with this film, WILDCAT, it's a very meditative, like you said, Michael, but it just really gets into the mind of Flannery O'Connor and doesn't really seem to be interested in manufacturing all these great feats or any sort of achievements that she may have won in her time. It just goes into her writings and her mind in a really wonderfully visceral way, which I just appreciate that it was in the way it reflects Flannery's writing, as in the authentic and the honest, and the film is the exact the same.
You know, I mean, that's awesome. It comes because of it really. I mean, Maya, I'm not going to speak for what's out in her future, but I would suspect that she'll always look back at this and go, this was one of the greatest moments of her life, to be able to turn somebody she admired and to be able to, the honor for her to be able to play that role. And it speaks to that, but it speaks to her dad and Ethan and Shelby and was telling Jared earlier, the first thing that Ethan and Shelby did after they decided to kind of explore, should we write a script, is they spent 6 months reading everything that Flannery ever wrote, just absorbing her, trying to understand her. So they really respected her. They also went into it with a deep, profound respect, you know, and it was art for the sake of art. There was no thinking whatsoever like, oh man, we're going to make a ton of money on this idea. We're going to make a lot of money on this film. On the contrary, it's quite the opposite, you know, and to have the opportunity to create art, tell stories for the sake of the art and the beauty. And so I was brought into it well after this, you know, their process, but I know the integrity and honoring and championing Flannery O'Connor, that how if she would ever want her story told, which she never ever would, what would come closest to making her say, thank you for that, you know, and I think that's why you see what you see, because they didn't make it about them. Maya never made it about her. Ethan, as a director, never made it about him. I mean, Maya so wanted to deliver Flannery the way that she felt like Flannery should be delivered. Halloween, 3 months before we were shooting, Maya dressed up like Flannery, put everything, had the teeth, everything in, so that when kids came to trick or treat, she was Flannery O'Connor. So she's like practicing.
Oh, I love that.
She's just getting into the flow and the character, and I think that's what's really cool when a biopic is done the right way, and it doesn't become some writer director's like indulgent, like this is who this person really was.
Yeah.
But when you got them going, we're gonna be honest and tell an authentic story, then what comes out of it is what I think WILDCAT delivered. Yeah,
I think it did too.
Yeah, there's so much humility in her performance. I think you're totally right. We'll look back on this as like a turning point in Maya Hawke's career, where she like really took charge. Because I mean, this is really her baby, right? This is her, like, it came out of her desire to make this story. I mean, are we still in an awards campaign season? Like, she needs some recognition.
Oh, I'm telling you, you know, and that's just one of those things where I felt all along like Laura Linney is an amazing woman,
that lady,
an amazing actor, one of the best of my generation, and she and Maya both. Like, I look at that, I look at the screenplay, and I think, well, these things are worthy of that, you know. I'm not sure where it plays in the flow of the year we released in 2020. It's possible, but
well, with the Center for Catholic Media's Film Award show, she's winning. She's
taking Best Actress.
Best Actress.
I had kind of a follow-up question regarding just the biopics, and you take the life, albeit a somewhat short one, but the life of Flannery O'Connor, and you want to make a film about her. Why pick the years and the life, the time frame that you picked for the biopic, and not after or before, or what made you specifically want to go into that section of her life?
Yeah, because it's a pretty short life she had.
Right. No, that's a really good question. You know, boy, I wish Ethan were right.
Yeah.
And I had the privilege of, you know, when we released the film, we were in a bunch of different cities and doing screenings, and Ethan just speaks so articulately to it. But I think if I had to say part of their impetus and the reason why they approached it is because when you can look at a person as they're launching into the beginning of a deep human struggle, you know, for Flannery not feeling well, things not going well, her mom deceiving her a little bit, you know, trying to protect her, but it's arthritis, you know.
Oh, right, yeah, hiding
the disease. And that scene with her aunt who died, we were talking about earlier, so profound. Like, and I love Maya Flannery's response, and that, well, thank you for telling me it's not good news, but I at least I know, and don't tell Duchess you told me, because I may never find another thing about, or don't tell my mom, you know, Regina. But I think to enter into a moment of struggle. As a filmmaker, those things I'm really attracted to. When we did our first film, Full of Grace, you've got, we're doing this, we're using imagination, we're reflecting on what the last moments of the Blessed Mother's life could have looked like, as she's close to these apostles who she was mom to them, and what does that look like, or when we did Paul, Apostle of Christ, and Paul spent the last 700 days of his life in a hole in the ground, and there's something very real and human and that brings connection when you look at the person when they're in the midst or on the front end or nearing the end of a deep struggle. And so, I think that was the launching point for that, rather than coming in as she's building more success.
Yeah. Too, I just from an audience perspective, I wonder if, Ethan Hawke's worked on that Before Sunrise trilogy where they came back every 7 years to the same character. I'd love to see, Maya and Ethan tackle this character in 10 years and just get with the wisdom, maybe address the end of her life.
What would it look like at the end of her life?
What would it look like?
That's interesting.
But, so we're talking a lot, Eric, about, the way that certain artists see the world, or at least embracing your mission and your mission in life. I just wonder, what's your mission in life? You've worked on all these movies, Full of Grace, like you said. Paul, Apostle of Christ. I saw that when it came out in theaters, and we were talking over lunch that that was the first faith-based quote unquote movie that I saw where I was just like, this is a real movie. This is not, and not even just in the production level, just in the storytelling and the struggles that it introduced. Where does that come from? What's your mission in the film industry? I wonder.
Yeah, no, when we started our first company, not-for-profit company called Outside the Box, ODB Films, our mission was very simple back then. It still is, at the heart of it, it's still the same. Our mission was to create short films that would help teens know, love, and serve Jesus. So I was a youth minister, working as a campus minister, and wanting to have resources that would help me communicate the gospel in real creative ways. And so ultimately, the filmmaking for me is, and it's just a unique medium, a very important medium that is international. Millions and millions and millions, probably billions of people have watched films. So to be able to use that medium to share important messages is the mission. I want people to know and love and follow Jesus, and I think we do that. That doesn't mean we have to make Jesus-y films. I think ultimately, as we were talking earlier, there is something that's common to all human beings. We're all created by one maker, and that maker has put in us a longing, a holy longing. Like Augustine, what does he say? Did he say, my heart is restless until it rests in you, O Lord? And so we have this longing, and the longing for God is felt and expressed and in the pursuit of the beautiful, the good, the true. And it's not only given to the Christian. It's actually given to the Jew, and it's given to the Muslim, it's given to the Hindu, and it's given to, if you are a human, your heart will not rest until it rests in Him. And the only way, I think, I would say responsible, but if I'm being strategic as a filmmaker, and I know humans, we live stories every day. We live a story in a day, we live a story in a week, we live a story in a month, we live a story in a year, 10 years, in a lifetime. It's constant living in stories. And so we are story-driven people. Our lives are narratives, and we long for things that are beautiful and good and true. So as filmmakers, then shouldn't we create films that explore that? and explored in unique ways, and they might be ways that startle, like Flannery. And they might be ways that don't seem typical or normal or are uncomfortable. But I think ultimately, as I've become a filmmaker, it's like salvation, right? We were saved, we're being saved, and I hope to be saved someday. It's like filmmaking. Yes. I was a filmmaker. I am a filmmaker. Someday I hope to be a filmmaker. It's just this journey of like, how do we become the best at what we're doing? It's just experience and time. But I know that what I want to stay focused and true on is telling stories that are accessible. So it's not just for the Catholic or not just for the Christian, but they're accessible. And I think in there we can touch the most lives. You know, I shared with you guys at lunch my favorite review of our Paul film was from the Village Voice, and the title of the article said, "It's a miracle this atheist critic actually likes Paul, Apostle of Christ." So if we can make a Bible film about a very prolific Bible personality, but somebody who claims no faith can say that was a good movie, then I think we might be on the right path. We might be doing something right. We might be sharing something that stirs the heart because they long for beauty, goodness, and truth.
Okay, absolutely. So well put. I hope you can. Sorry, Pat. Did you want to say something?
No, I had my mouth open because I was just like, caught up with that beautiful story of yours. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. I really hope that you continue on this mission, Eric. I can't wait to see what's coming up next. Thank you so much for being on the show. It's sharing your story with us. And just thanks to everyone watching. This has been the Catholic Film Club, and it's brought to you by the Center for Catholic Media at Benedictine College in Atchison, Kansas. It's brought to you weekly, and we are covering new and old films every week. And thank you, Eric, again.
Thank you, Eric.
Thank you, guys. It was wonderful.
I can't wait to read another Flannery O'Connor story now. All right.
We have a
whole book to go through. Said nobody ever.
Until now. We're actually showing the movie tonight. We're screening the film tonight for students at Benedictine College, and so can't wait to hear their takes.
I'm excited to see it again, honestly, after a conversation.
Yeah, on the big screen.
Me too. I haven't watched it in 5 months.
Oh my gosh.
It's like, okay, here we go.
Oh, no way.
Let's do it. Let's go now.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone, for watching and listening. God bless.